Old Theories of the Origin of Untouchability, Chapter 7, Racial Difference as the Origin of Untouchability, Chapter 8, Occupational Origin of Untouchability, Chapter 7, Racial Difference as the Origin of Untouchability. What is the origin of untouchability? As has been said, the field is quite unexplored. No student of sociology has paid any attention to it. Writers, other than sociologists, who have written about India and her people, have been content with merely recording the customs of untouchability with varying degrees of disapprobation and leaving it at that. So far as my researches go, I have come across only one author who has attempted to explain how untouchability has come about. It is Mr. Stanley Rice. Reference to his book, Hindu Customs and Their Origins, page 113 to 115. According to Mr. Rice, quotation begins, there is a strong probability that the outcasts were the survivors of the conquered people who, as castes tended to coincide with occupation, became the drum-beating, leather-working and farm-laboring classes to which, as serfs, they had been relegated from early times. They were not the races conquered by the Aryans. The Aryans belonged to the Aborigines, who were conquered by the Dravidians, and being of a different race, they were not admitted to the totem of similar clans with which marriage is always intimately connected, since that would have led to free intercourse and the gradual degradation of race. But this prohibition cannot have been absolute. There are always exceptions. In the course of the centuries, some 40 or more, the inevitable miscegenation may very well have obliterated the racial distinctions between Aboriginal and early Dravidian. These people have been admitted to a sort of lowly participation in the Hindu system, in the atmosphere of which they have lived for so long, for Hinduism is at once the most tolerant and intolerant of creeds. It does not proselytize. You cannot become a Hindu as you can become a Mussalman, and those within the fold are liable to the most rigid restrictions. But it has always been ready to embrace aboriginal tribes who are willing to submit to its laws, though it may assign to them a very lowly place, and they have always been kept at a distance and have been excluded from the temples. It would seem, therefore, that anthropological arguments are in any case not conclusive. When we consider these factors, which must have profoundly modified the original racial characteristics and must have changed their outlook. Thus the Dravidians applied to the Aryans the same test which the Aryans are assumed to have applied to the conquered inhabitants. They reduced them to the position of serfs and assigned to them those duties which it was thought beneath their own dignity to perform. Nor was marriage the only consideration. The disabilities of the Aryans were due also, and to even a greater degree, to the mystical qualities inherent in taboo. To admit such a man to the totem family was not only contrary to the social order, it would bring upon the clan the anger of their particular god, but to admit him to the worship of the god within the sacred precincts of a temple was to call upon authentic fire from heaven, whereby they would be consumed. It would be sacrilege of the same kind as the offering of unconsecrated or unorthodox fire by Quran, Datan and Abraham. But though debarred from taking an active part in worship, the Aryans might yet do the menial services connected with it, provided that they did not entail the pollution of the sacred building. In Christian terminology, the Aryan, although he could neither officiate at the altar, nor preach a sermon, nor even be one of the congregation, might still ring the bell on one condition. He could not regard himself as of the communion. He was, in fact, excommunicate, and as such he was ceremonially unclean. No washing with water, no cleansing ceremony could remove that stain which was indelibly fixed by the operation of taboo. To touch him, to have any dealings with him, save as it were at arm's length, was by a sort of contagious magic a defilement. You could employ him to till your field, because that entailed no contact of any kind beyond giving an order. You need have no further communication with him. The seal of pollution was set on his forehead. It was inherent in him as surely as the blood in his veins. And so from being the vile, degraded fellow which Indian opinion had made him, he became viler and more degraded from the kinds of occupation left open to him. Quotation finished. The theory of Mr. Rice really divides itself into two parts, for according to him, the origin of untouchability is to be found in two circumstances, race and occupation. Obviously, they require separate consideration. This chapter will be devoted to an examination of his theory of racial difference as the origin of untouchability. The racial theory of Mr. Rice contains two elements. One, that the untouchables are non-Aryan, non-Dravidian aboriginals, and two, that they were conquered and subjugated by the Dravidians. This theory raises the whole question of the invasions of India by foreign invaders, the conquests made by them, and the social and cultural institutions that have resulted therefrom. According to Mr. Rice, there have been two invasions of India. First is the invasion of India by the Dravidians. They conquered the non-Dravidian aborigines, the ancestors of the untouchables, and made them untouchables. The second invasion is the invasion of India by the Aryans. The Aryans conquered the Dravidians. He does not say how the conquering Aryans treated the conquered Dravidians. If pressed for an answer, he might say they made them Shudras, so that we get a chain. The Dravidians invaded India and conquered the aborigines and made them untouchables. After Dravidians came the Aryans. The Aryans conquered the Dravidians and made them Shudras. The theory is too mechanical, a mere speculation, and too simple to explain a complicated set of facts relating to the origin of the Shudras and the untouchables. When students of ancient Indian history delve into the ancient past, they too often come across four names: the Aryans, Dravidians, Dasas, and Nagas. What do these names indicate? This question has never been considered. Are these names, Aryans, Dravidians, Dasas, and Nagas, the names of different races, or are they merely different names for a people of the same race? The general assumption is that they are different races. It is an assumption on which theories like that of Mr. Rice, which seek to explain the social structure of the Hindu society, particularly its class basis, are built. Before such a theory is accepted, it is necessary to examine its foundations. Starting with the Aryans, it is beyond dispute that they were not a single homogeneous people. That they were divided into two sections is beyond dispute. Reference: for an exhaustive treatment of the subject, see my book, Who Were the Shudras? Reference over. It is also beyond dispute that the two had different cultures. One of them may be called Rigvedic Aryans and the other the Atharva-Vedic Aryans. Their cultural cleavage appears to be complete. The Rigvedic Aryans believed in Yagna. The Atharva-Vedic Aryans believed the Magis. Their mythologies were different. The Rigvedic Aryans believed in the deluge and the creation of their race from Manu. The Atharva-Vedic Aryans did not believe in deluge, but believed in the creation of their race from Brahma or Prajapati. Their literary developments also lay along different paths. The Rigvedic Aryans produced Brahmanas, Sutras, and Aranyakas. The Atharva-Vedic Aryans produced the Upanishads. Their cultural conflict was so great that the Rigvedic Aryans would not for a long time admit the sanctity of the Atharva Veda nor of the Upanishads, and when they did recognize it, they called it Vedanta, which, contrary to the current meaning of the word, namely essence of the Vedas, originally meant something outside the boundary of the Vedas and therefore not so sacred as the Vedas, and regarded its study as anuloma. Whether these two sections of Aryans were two different races, we do not know. We do not know whether the word Aryan is a term indicative of race. Historians have therefore made a mistake in proceeding on the assumption that the Aryans were a separate race. A greater mistake lies in differentiating the Dasas from the Nagas. The Dasas are the same as Nagas. Dasas is merely another name for Nagas. It is not difficult to understand how the Nagas came to be called Dasas in the Vedic literature. Dasa is a Sanskritized form of the Indo-Iranian word Dahaka. Dahaka was the name of the king of the Nagas. Reference to, on this point, see my volume, Who Were the Shudras? Reference over. Consequently, the Aryans called the Nagas after the name of their king Dahaka, which in its Sanskrit form became Dasa, a generic name applied to all the Nagas. Who were the Nagas? Undoubtedly, they were non-Aryans. A careful study of the Vedic literature reveals a spirit of conflict, of a dualism, and a race for superiority between two distinct types of culture and thought. Reference to, for the facts stated in the next few pages, see a paper on the Nagas and the Naga cult in ancient Indian history by Miss Karuna Kara Gupta in the proceedings of the third session of the Indian History Congress, 1939, page 214 onwards. Reference over. In the Rig Veda, we are first introduced to the snake god in the form of Ahivitra, the enemy of the Aryan god Indra. Naga, the name under which the snake god was to become so famous in later days, does not appear in early Vedic literature, even when it does for the first time in the Satpatha Brahmana, within brackets 11.2, 7 and 12. It is not clear whether a great snake or a great elephant is meant, but this does not conceal the nature of Ahivitra, since he is described always in Rig Veda as the serpent who lay around or hidden in waters and as holding a full control over the waters of heaven and earth alike. It is also evident from the hymns that refer to Ahivitra that he received no worship from the Aryan tribes and was only regarded as an evil spirit of considerable power who must be fought down. The mention of the Nagas in the Rig Veda shows that the Nagas were a very ancient people. It must also be remembered that the Nagas were in no way an aboriginal or uncivilized people. History shows a very close association by intermarriage between the Naga people with the royal families in India. The Devagiri record of the Kadamba king Krishna Varma connects the beginning of the Kadamba Kul with the Nagas. Reference to I.A.7. page number 34. Reference over. The Roya Kota grant of 9th century AD mentions the marriage of Ashwathama with a Nagi and the foundation of the Pallava line by Skanda Shishya, the issue of this marriage. Reference to E.L. 15, page 246. Reference over. The Roya Kota grant of 9th century AD mentions the marriage of Ashwathama with a Nagi and the foundation of the Pallava line by Skanda Shishya, the issue of this marriage. Veerakurcha, who according to another Pallava inscription dated in the 9th century AD was the ruler of the dynasty, is also mentioned in the same inscription as having married a Nagi and obtained from her the insignia of royalty. The marriage of Gautami Putra, the son of the Vakataka king Pravarsena, with the daughter of the Bharasiva king Bhavanaga is a historical fact. So is the marriage of Chandragupta II with Princess Kuvera Naga of Nagakul. A Tamil poet asserts that Kokili, an early Chola king, had married a Naga princess. Rajendra Chola is also credited to have won by his radiant beauty the hand of the noble daughter of Naga race. The Navasaha Sanka Charita describes the marriage of the Parmar king Sindhuraja, who seems to have reigned towards the early part of the 10th century AD, with the Naga princess Sasiprabha, with such exhaustive details in so matter-of-fact a manner as to make us almost feel certain that there must have been some historical basis for this assertion. From the Harsha inscription of VS 1030 to 973 AD, we know that Guvaka I, who was the sixth king in the genealogy upwards from Vigraha Raja Chahmana, and thus might be supposed to have been ruling towards the middle of the 9th century, was famous as a hero in the assemblies of the Nagas and other princes. Sanatikara of the Bhaum dynasty of Orissa, one of whose dates was most probably 921 AD, is mentioned in an inscription of his son as having married Tribhuvanad Mahadevi of the Naga family. Not only did the Naga people occupy a high cultural level, but history shows that they ruled a good part of India. That Maharashtra is the home of the Nagas goes without saying. Its people and its kings were Nagas. Reference to Rajwade, reference over. That Andhra Desa and its neighborhood were under the Nagas during the early centuries of the Christian era is suggested by evidence from more sources than one. The Satvahanas and their successors, the Chutukula Satkarnis, drew their blood more or less from the Naga stock. As Dr. H.C. Roy has pointed out, the Dottrima Satpukalita represents Salivahana, the mythological representative of the Satvahana dynasty, as of mixed Brahmana and the Naga origin. This is amply attested to by the typical Naga names which occur in their dynastic lists. That the Naga grew to be very powerful towards the end of the Satvahana rule is also proved by a number of facts. A chief called Skandanaga is found ruling the Bellari district in the reign of Pulumavi, the last king of the main Satvahana line. Secondly, Naga Mulanika, the daughter of a Chutu king, is mentioned as making a gift of a Naga together with her son, who is called Sivakanda Naga Shri. All the known kings of this line bear the same name and thus prove a close association with the Nagas. Thirdly, the name of Uragapura, the capital of Sorin Goi, suggests not an isolated reign of one Naga king, but a Naga settlement in that locality of tolerably long duration. From Buddhist tradition of Ceylon and Siam, we also know that there was a Naga country called Majarika near the Diamond Sands, that is Karachi. Reference to Cunningham, A. Geo.India, page number 611 to 612. Reference over. Then during the 3rd and early part of the 4th century AD, northern India also was ruled by a number of Naga kings is clearly proved by Puranic as well as numismatic and epigraphic evidence. 3 independent groups of Vidisha, Champavati or Padmavati, and Mathura are distinctly mentioned in such a way as to leave little doubt of their importance. The name Bhavanaga, the only known king of the Bharasiva dynasty, also seems to connect him with the Nagas. It is not possible to enter here into a discussion of the coins of the second group or the question of identification of Achyuta Ganpati Naga or Nagasena of Allahabad pillar inscription with these Puranic Naga kings. Reference to G.M.I, page number 23 to 24. Reference over. Of all the Nagas referred to in ancient Indian history, the North Indian Naga houses of the 4th century AD stand out as the most prominent and historically the most tangible. We do not know whether Naga Bhatta and his son Maharaja Moheswara Naga of the Lahore copper seal belonged to any of these 3 groups or formed a separate Naga family by themselves. Reference to G.I, page 284. Reference over. But all this sufficiently justifies the conclusion of Dr. H.C. Chaudhary that the Kushana kingdom of northern India disappeared in the 4th century AD, having been conquered by the Nagas. These Nagas must have been ruling over different portions of Uttarpatha till they were themselves swept away before the conquering arms of Samudragupta. As late as the time of Skandagupta, however, we find one Sarvanaga as the governor of Antarvedi. Reference to G.I, page 68. Reference over. In the neighborhood of Saurashtra and Bharuch, especially the Nagas, seem to have held a prominent position down to the 6th century AD. From the Junagadh inscription, Skandagupta appears to have dealt severely with a Naga rebellion. Reference to GI, page 59. Reference over. In 570 AD, Dadda I Gurjara uprooted the Nagas. Reference to I.A. Chapter 13, page 82. Reference over. Who have been identified with the jungle tribes ruled over by Brihul Laka of Bharuch. Reference to British Gazetteer, Volume 1, page 1.115. Reference over. Dhruv Sena's II's grant of GS 334 within brackets 645 AD also mentions as Dutaka the Pramatri Srinaga. Reference to ELI, page 92. The next important revival of the Nagas, particularly in central India, seems to date about the 9th century AD. In 800 AD, Maharaja Tivara Dev of Sripura in Kosla most probably defeated a Naga tribe. Reference to GI, page 298. Reference over. Sometime after this period, we also note 2 references to Nagas in the inscription of Bengal. The Ramganj record of Mahamandalika Ishwara Ghosha introduces us to a Ghosha Naga family of Dekkari, which was to be assigned to 11th century AD. Reference to Bhandarkar's list number 2100. Reference over. The Bhuvaneshwara Prasasti of Bhatta Bhavadeva, the minister of Harivarma Deva in 12th century AD, also refers to destruction of Naga kings by him. Ramcharit mentions the conquest of Utkala, the kingdom of Bhavabhushan Santati, by Rampala, but it is not clear whether in this case the Nagas or the Chandras were meant. The greater probability would, however, lie in favor of the former, since they were the more well-known. It was in the period 10th to 12th century AD that the different branches of the Sendraka, Senda or Chindaka family, which called themselves Lords of Bhogavati and Nagavamsi, gradually spread themselves over different portions of central India, particularly Bastar. The Nagattaras of Begur, too, appear in an inscription of the 10th century AD as having fought against King Veer Mahendra on behalf of the W. Ganga king Aryappa and being distinguished for bravery in the fight. Reference to E.I.6, page 45. Reference over. If the evidence of Nav Shashank Charita is accepted, then the Naga king, whose daughter Shashi Prabha was married to Sindhuraja Parmar, must also have been ruling in Ratnavati on the Narmada at about this period. Who are the Dravidians? Are they different from the Nagas? Or are they 2 different names for a people of the same race? The popular view is that the Dravidians and Nagas are names of 2 different races. This statement is bound to shock many people. Nonetheless, it is a fact that the term Dravidians and Nagas are merely 2 different names for the same people. It is not to be denied that very few people will be prepared to admit the proposition that the Dravidians and Nagas are merely 2 different names for the same people, and fewer that the Dravidians as Nagas occupied not merely South India, but that they occupied the whole of India, South as well as North. Nonetheless, these are historical truths. Let us see what the authorities have to say on the subject. This is what Mr. Dikshitier, a well-known South Indian scholar, has to say on the subject in his paper on South India in the Ramayana. Reference to Proceedings of the 7th All India Oriental Conference, page 248 to 249. Quotation begins. The Nagas, another tribe semi-divine in character, with their totems as serpent, spread throughout India from Takshila in the northwest to Assam in the northeast and to Ceylon and South India in the south. At one time, they must have been powerful, contemporaneous with the Yakwas, or perhaps subsequent to their fall as a political entity, the Nagas rose to prominence in South India. Not only parts of Ceylon, but ancient Malabar were the territories occupied by the ancient Nagas. In the Tamil classics of the early centuries after Christ, we hear frequent references to Naga Nadu. Remnants of Naga worship are still lingering in Malabar, and the temple in Nagarkoil in South Travancore is dedicated to Naga worship even today. All that can be said about them is that they were a seafaring tribe. Their women folk were renowned for their beauty. Apparently, the Nagas had become merged with the Cheras, who rose to power and prominence at the commencement of the Christian era. Quotation finished. Further light is thrown on the subject by C.F. Oldham, who has made a deep study of it. According to Mr. Oldham, reference to The Sun and the Serpent, page 157 to 161. Quotation begins. The Dravidian people have been divided from ancient times into Cheras, Cholas, and Pandyas. Chera or Sera, that is in Old Tamil Sarai, is the Dravidian equivalent for Naga. Chera Mandala, Nagada Vaipa, or the Naga country. This seems to point distinctly to the Asura origin of the Dravidians of the south. But in addition to this, there still exists, widely spread over the Ganges Valley, a people who call themselves Cherus or Serus and who claim descent from the serpent gods. Reference to Eliot, Supplementary Glossary, N.W.F, page 135 to 136. Reference over. The Cherus are of very ancient race. They are believed to have once held a great portion of the valley of the Ganges, which, as we have already seen, was occupied in very early times by Naga tribes. The Cherus appear to have been gradually ousted from their lands during the troubled times of the Mohammedan invasions, and they are now poor and almost landless. There can be little doubt that these people are kinsmen of the Dravidian Cheras. The Cherus have several peculiar customs, and amongst them one which seems to connect them with the Lichvis as well as with the Nevars of Nepal. This is the election of a Raja for every 5 or 6 houses, and his investiture in due form with the tilak or royal frontal mark. Reference to Sharing, Races of N.W.P, page number 376 to 377. Reference over. Both Lichvis and Nevars had many customs in common with the Dravidians of the south. Each venerated the serpent, Karkotaka Naga, being to Nepal what Nila Naga was to Kashmere. A Naga too was the tutelary deity of Vaishali, the Lichvi capital. The marital relations of Nevars and Lichvis closely resembled those of the Tamil people and go far to show a common origin. Property among the Nevars descended in the female line, as it once did amongst the Aratas, Bahikas, or Takhas of the Punjab, whose sisters' sons and not their own were their heirs. Reference to Mahabharata, Kern, page 14. This is still a Dravidian custom. In short, a recent Dravidian writer, Mr. Balakrishna Nair, says that his people appear to be, in nearly every particular, the kinsfolk of the Nevars. This reference appeared in Calcutta Review in July 1896. Reference over. Besides all this, however, there are other links connecting the Naga people of the south with those of the north of India. In an inscription discovered by Colonel Todd at Kanswa near the river Chambal, a Raja called Salindra of the race of Sarya, a tribe renowned amongst the tribes of the mighty, is said to be ruler of Takhya. Reference to Annals of Rajasthan, 1.795. This was evidently the Takhya or Takha kingdom of the Punjab, which was visited by Huan Sang and which has been already referred to. Reference to Huan Sang, BL 1.165. Reference over. It seems, therefore, that the Naga people of Takya were also known by the name of Sarya. Again, in the outer Himalaya, between the Satluj and Beas valleys, is a tract of country called Sara or Sioraj. In this district, the Naga demigods are the chief deities worshipped. There is another Sioraj in the upper Chenab valley, and this too is occupied by a Naga worshipping people. The name Saraj or Sioraj appears to be the same as the Sarya of Colonel Todd's inscription and as Siori, which is the alternative name of the Cherus of the Ganges Valley. It also seems to be identical with Sarai, which we have already seen is the old Tamil name for the Chera or Naga. Apparently, therefore, the Saryas or Takya, the Saraj people of the Satluj Valley, the Sioris or Cherus of the valley of the Ganges, and the Cheras, Seras or Keralas of southern India are but different branches of the same Naga worshipping people. It may be noted too that in some of the Himalayan dialects, Kira or Kiri means a serpent. This name, from which was perhaps derived the term Kirat, so often applied to the people of the Himalayas, is found in the Rajat Rangini, where it is applied to a people in or near Kashmere. The Kiras are mentioned by Varaha Mehra and in a copper plate published by Professor Keelhorn. Reference to Rajat Rangini, Stain, 8.27-67, Rapson, JRAS, July 1900, page 533. Reference over. An inscription at the Bajnath temple in the Kangra valley gives Kira Gram as the name of the place. This in the local dialect would mean the village of serpents. The Naga is still a popular deity at Bajnath and throughout the neighboring country. The term Kira is thus an equivalent for Naga, and it can scarcely be doubted that the serpent-worshipping Kiras of the Himalayas were closely related to the Dravidian Keras, Cheras or Keralas of the south. Similarity of name is not always to be trusted, but here we have something more. These people, whose designation is thus apparently the same, are all of solar race. They all venerate the hooded serpent, and they all worship as ancestors the Naga demigods. From the foregoing, it would seem tolerably certain that the Dravidians of southern India were of the same stock as the Nagas or Asuras of the north. Quotation finished. It is thus clear that the Nagas and Dravidians are one and the same people. Even with this much of proof, people may not be found ready to accept the thesis. The chief difficulty in the way of accepting it lies in the designation of the people of South India by the name Dravidian. It is natural for them to ask why the term Dravidian has come to be restricted to the people of South India if they are really Nagas. Critics are bound to ask, if the Dravidians and the Nagas are the same people, why is the name Nagas not used to designate people of South India also? This is no doubt a puzzle, but it is a puzzle which is not beyond solution. It can be solved if certain facts are borne in mind. The first thing to be borne in mind is the situation regarding language. Today the language of the southern India differs from that of the people of northern India. Was this always so? On this question, the observations of Mr. Oldham are worth attention. Reference to his book, The Sun and the Serpent. Quotation begins, "It is evident that the old Sanskrit grammarians considered the language of the Dravidian countries to be connected with the vernaculars of northern India, and that, in their opinion, it was specially related to the speech of those people who, as we have seen, were apparently descendants of the Asura tribes. Thus, in the Shahasha Chandrika, Lakshmi Dhara says that the Paisachi language is spoken in the Paisachi countries of Pandya, Kekaya, Vahalika, Sahya, Nepala, Kuntala, Sudesha, Bhota, Gandhara, Haiva and Kannauj, and that these are the Paisachi countries. Of all the vernacular dialects, the Paisachi is said to have contained the smallest infusion of Sanskrit." Also reference to Muir, OST 2.49. Reference over. The quotation continues. That the Asuras originally spoke a language which differed from that of the Aryas seems evident. Several passages are quoted by Professor Muir from the Rig Veda in which the word Mridvak is applied to the speech of the Asuras. Within brackets, Rig Veda 6.74, 2, semicolon, 5.6.3, semicolon, 5.7.6, brackets closed. Of these passages, Professor Muir observes, the word Mridvak, which I have translated injuriously speaking, is explained by Sayana as meaning one whose organs of speech are destroyed. Reference to Muir, OST 2.49. The original meaning of the expression was, doubtless, that the language of the Asuras was more or less unintelligible to the Aryas. The same explanation will apply to another passage in the Rig Veda where it is said, may we, by propitiating Indra, conquer the ill-speaking man. Reference to Rig Veda by Wilson, 7, 18, page number 13. Reference over. From the Satpatha Brahmana, we find that the Asuras, being deprived of speech, were undone, crying, Hey Lava, Hey Lava. Such was the unintelligible speech which they uttered, and he who speaks thus is a mlecha. Hence, let no Brahman speak barbarous language, since such is the speech of Asuras. Reference to Satpatha Brahmana, 3. Page number 2, 1 and 23. Reference over. We learn from Manu that those tribes who are outside of the classes produced from the mouth, arms, thighs, and feet of Brahman, whether they speak the language of the Mlechas or of the Aryas, are called Dasyus. Reference to Muir, Houghton, 10.45. Reference over. In the time of Manu, therefore, the Aryan language and that of the Mlechas or Asuras were both in use. At the period described in the Mahabharata, however, the Asura language must have almost died out amongst the Aryanized tribes, as Vidura addressed Yudhishthira in the Mlecha tongue, so as to be unintelligible to all except Yudhishthira. Reference to Mahabharata, Adi Jatagriha, page 105/7. Reference over. At a later period than this, however, the grammarian Rama Tarkavagisa refers to those who speak like Nagas. Reference to Muir, O.S.T. 2.52. Reference over. It would seem, therefore, that the unregenerate Asuras retained the language as well as the religion and customs of their forefathers long after their converted brethren had discarded them. It was evidently amongst these unregenerate tribes that the Paisachi dialects were in use, and amongst these tribes, as we have just seen, were the Dravidian Pandyas. Reference to Ibid, page number 49. Reference over. This view that the Tamil and cognate tongues were founded upon the ancient Asura speech is very strongly confirmed by the fact that the language of the Brahuis, a tribe on the borders of Sindh, has been found to be very closely allied to them. Indeed, Dr. Caldwell says, inverted comma begins, the Brahui language enables us to trace the Dravidian race beyond the Indus to the southern confines of Central Asia. This country, as I have already pointed out, was the home of the Asuras or Nagas, to which race apparently belonged the founders of the Dravidian kingdoms. Inverted comma closed. Taking into consideration all the evidence which has been brought forward, the only possible conclusion seems to be that the Dravidians of the south of India were of the same stock as the Asuras or Nagas of the north. Quotation finished. The second thing to be borne in mind is that the word Dravida is not an original word. It is the Sanskritized form of the word Tamil. The original word Tamil, when imported into Sanskrit, became Damita, and later on Damila became Dravida. Reference to BR Bhandarkar, Lectures on the Ancient History of India, 1919, page 80. Reference over. The word Dravida is the name of the language of the people and does not denote the race of the people. The third thing to remember is that Tamil or Dravida was not merely the language of South India, but before the Aryans came, it was the language of the whole of India. Reference to IBID, page number 25 to 28. And was spoken from Kashmere to Cape Camorin. In fact, it was the language of the Nagas throughout India. The next thing to note is the contact between the Aryan and the Nagas and the effect it produced on the Nagas and their language. Strange as it may appear, the effect of this contact on the Nagas of North India was quite different from the effect it produced on the Nagas of South India. The Nagas in North India gave up Tamil, which was their mother tongue, and adopted Sanskrit in its place. The Nagas in South India retained Tamil as their mother tongue and did not adopt Sanskrit, the language of the Aryans. If this difference is borne in mind, it will help to explain why the name Dravida came to be applied only for the people of South India. The necessity for the application of the name Dravida to the Naga of northern India had ceased because they had ceased to speak the Dravida language. But so far as the Nagas of South India are concerned, not only the propriety of calling them Dravida had remained in view of their adherence to the Dravida language, but the necessity of calling them Dravida had become very urgent in view of their being the only people speaking the Dravida language after the Nagas of the north had ceased to use it. This is the real reason why the people of South India have come to be called Dravidians. The special application of the use of the word Dravida for the people of South India must not therefore obscure the fact that the Nagas and Dravidas are the one and the same people. They are only two different names for the same people. Nagas was a racial or cultural name and Dravida was their linguistic name. Thus the Dasas are the same as the Nagas and the Nagas are the same as the Dravidians. Section 2. Granting, however, that there was a third aboriginal race living in India before the advent of the Dravidians, can it be said that these pre-Dravidian aboriginals were the ancestors of the present-day untouchables of India? There are two tests we can apply to find the truth. One is the anthropometric test and the other is the ethnological. Considered in the light of the anthropometric characteristics of the Indian people, Professor Ghurier has something very striking to say in his volume on caste and race in India, from which this extract has been taken. Quotation begins, taking the Brahmin of the United Provinces as the typical representative of the ancient Aryans, we shall start comparisons with him. If we turn to the table of differential indices, we find that he shows a smaller differential index as compared with the Chuhra and the Khatri of the Punjab than with any caste from the United Provinces except the Chhatri. The differential index between the Khatri and the Chuhra is the only slightly less than that between the Brahmin of the United Provinces and the Chuhra of the Punjab. Reference, Chuhra is an untouchable of the Punjab. Reference over. This means that the Brahmin of the United Provinces has closer physical affinities with the Chuhra and the Khatri of the Punjab than with any caste from his own province, except the very high caste of the Chhatri. The reality of this close affinity between the United Provinces Brahmin and the Punjab Chuhra is more clearly brought out if we look at the table of differential indices between the United Provinces Brahmin and the Brahmins of other regions. Even the differential index between the United Provinces Brahmin and the Bihar Brahmins, who from what we know about the history of spread of the Aryan culture is expected to be very nearly allied to the former, is just as high as that between the United Provinces Brahmin and the Chuhra. On historical ground, we expect Bihar to approximate to the United Provinces. On referring to the table, we find that the Kurmi comes near to the Brahmin, and the Chamar and the Dome stand much differentiated from him. Reference to Dome is an untouchable of Bihar. Reference over. But the Chamar in this case is not as much distinct from the Brahmin as the United Provinces Chamar is from the United Provinces Brahmin. The table for Bengal shows that the Chandal who stands sixth in the scheme of a social precedence and whose touch pollutes, is not much differentiated from the Brahmin, from whom the Kayasthas, second in rank, can hardly be said to be distinguished. In Bombay, the Deshashta Brahmin bears as closer affinity to the Sonkoli, a fisherman caste, as is to his own compeer, the Chitpavan Brahmin. The Mahar, the untouchable of the Maratha region, come next together with the Kunbi, the peasant. Then follow in order the Shenvi Brahmin, the Nagar Brahmin, and the high caste Maratha. These results are rather old. Stated in a generalized form, they mean that there is no correspondence between social gradation and physical differentiation in Bombay. Finally, we come to Madras. Here we must treat the different linguistic areas separately, for the schemes of social precedence in the various areas are different. According to the average given by Risley and by E. Thurston, the order of castes is thus: Kappu, Sail, Malla, Golla, Madiga, Fogata, and Komti. According to their social status, they are ranked as Brahmin, Komati, Golla, Kappu, and others, and Sail, Fogata, and others. Malla, Madiga occupy the lowest rank, being the pariahs of the Telugu country. In the Canaries, the nasal index gives the order as such: Karnatak Smarts, Brahmin, Bant, Bilva, Mandya Brahmin, Vakkaliga, Ganiga, Ling Banajiga, Panchala, Kurha, Huleya, Deshashta Brahmin, Toriya, and Bidar. In the scheme of social precedence, the castes are thus: Brahmin, Bant, and Vakkaliga, Toriya, etc., Kuruba and Ganiga, Badga and Kurumba, and Solaga, Bilva, Bida Holya. The significance of the comparison is enhanced when we remember that the nasal index of the Holya, the untouchables of the Canaries region, is 75.1, that of the highest of the Brahmin being 71.5, while those of the jungle Kurumba and the Solaga, who when Hinduized occupy the rank allotted to them in the list as 86.1 and 85.1 respectively. The Tamil castes may be arranged according to their nasal index in this order: Ambatan, Vellai, Idiyan, Agumudiyan, Tamil Brahmin, Pali, Malayali, Shanan, and Pariyan. The nasal indices of four typical Malayalam castes are Tiyan 75, Nambudri 75.5, Nair 76.7, Charuman 77.2. The order of social precedence among these is Nambudri, Nair, Tiyan, and the Charuman. The nasal index of the Kanikar, a jungle tribe of Travancore, is 8.46. Thus the Charuman, that is an unapproachable, belonging to the same race as the Brahmin rather than to Kanikar. Quotation finished. To omit from the above extract what is said about other communities and to draw attention to what relates to the untouchables only, it is clear that the nasal index of the Chuhara, that is the untouchables of the Punjab, is the same as the nasal index of the Brahmins of the United Provinces. The nasal index of the Chamar, the untouchable of Bihar, is not very much distinct from the Brahmin of Bihar. The nasal index of the Holya, that is an untouchable of the Canaries, is far higher than that of the Brahmin of Karnataka, and that the nasal index of the Cheruman, that is an unapproachable, lower than the Pariya of the Tamil, belongs to the same race as the Brahmin of the Tamil Nadu. If anthropometry is a science which can be depended upon to determine the race of a people, then the result obtained by the application of anthropometry to the various strata of Hindu society disprove that the untouchables belong to a race different from the Aryans and the Dravidians. The measurements establish that the Brahmin and the untouchables belong to the same race. From this, it follows that if the Brahmins are Aryans, the untouchables are also Aryans. If the Brahmins are Dravidians, the untouchables are also Dravidians. If the Brahmins are Nagas, the untouchables are also Nagas. Such being the facts, the theory propounded by Mr. Rice must be said to be based on a false foundation. Section 3. The racial theory of untouchability not only runs counter to the results of anthropometry, but it also finds very little support from such facts as we know about the ethnology of India. That the people of India were once organized on tribal basis is quite well known, and although the tribes have become castes, the tribal organization still remains intact. Each tribe was divided into clans, and the clans were composed of groups of families. Each group of families had a totem, which was some object, animate or inanimate. Those who had a common totem formed an exogamous group, popularly known as Gotra or Kula. Families having a common Gotra were not allowed to intermarry, for they were supposed to be descended from the same ancestor, having the same blood running in their veins. Having regard to this fact, an examination of the distribution of the totems among the different castes and communities should serve as good a test for determining race as anthropometry has been. Unfortunately, the study of the totems and their distribution among different communities has been completely neglected by students of sociology. This neglect is largely due to the current view propagated by the census commissioners that real unit of the Hindu social system and the basis of the fabric of Hindu society is the subcaste founded on the rule of endogamy. Nothing can be a greater mistake than this. The unit of Hindu society is not the subcaste but the family founded on the rule of exogamy. In this sense, the Hindu family is fundamentally a tribal organization and not a social organization as the subcaste is. The Hindu family is primarily guided in the matter of marriage by consideration of Kul and Gotra, and only secondarily by considerations of caste and subcaste. Kul and Gotra are Hindu equivalents of the totem of the primitive society. This shows that the Hindu society is still tribal in its organization, with the family at its base observing the rules of exogamy based on Kul and Gotra. Castes and subcastes are social organizations which are superimposed over the tribal organizations, and the rule of endogamy enjoined by them does not do away with the rule of exogamy enjoined by the tribal organizations of Kul and Gotra. The importance of recognizing the fact that it is the family which is fundamental and not the subcaste is obvious. It would lead to the study of the names of Kul and Gotra prevalent among Hindu families. Such a study would be a great help in determining the racial composition of the people of India. If the same Kul and Gotra were found to exist in different castes and communities, it would be possible to say that the castes, though socially different, were racially one. Two such studies have been made, one in Maharashtra by Riceley and another in Punjab by Mr. Rose, and the result flatly contradicts the theory that the untouchables are racially different from the Aryans or the Dravidians. Reference to Census of India, 1901, Ethnographical Appendices, and Glossary of Tribes and Castes in the Punjab by Rose, Volume 3, page 76. Reference over. The main bulk of the population in Maharashtra consists of Marathas. The Mahars are the untouchables of Maharashtra. The anthropological investigation shows that both have the same Kul. Indeed, the identity is so great that there is hardly a Kul among the Marathas which is not to be found among the Mahars, and there is no Kul among the Mahars which is not to be found among the Marathas. Similarly, in the Punjab, one main stock of people consists of Jats. The Mazhabi Sikhs are untouchables, most of them being Chamars by caste. Anthropological investigation shows that the two have the same Gotras. Given these facts, how can it be argued that the untouchables belong to a different race? As I have said, if totem, Kul, and Gotra have any significance, it means that those who have the same totem must have been kindred. If they were kindred, they could not be persons of different race. The racial theory of the origin of untouchability must therefore be abandoned. Chapter 8. Occupational origin of untouchability. We may now turn to the occupational theory of the origin of untouchability. According to Mr. Rice, the origin of untouchability is to be found in the unclean and filthy occupations of the untouchables. The theory is a very plausible one, but there are certain difficulties in the way of its being accepted as a true explanation of the origin of untouchability. The filthy and unclean occupations which the untouchables perform are common to all human societies. In every human society, there are people who perform these occupations. Why were such people not treated as untouchables in other parts of the world? The second question is, did the Dravidians have a nausea against such callings or against persons engaged in them? On this point, there is no evidence, but we have evidence about the Aryans. That evidence shows that the Aryans were like other people, and their notions of purity and impurity did not fundamentally differ from those of other ancient people. One has only to consider the text from Narad Smriti to show that the Aryans did not at all mind engaging themselves in filthy occupations. In chapter 5, Narada is dealing with the subject matter of breach of contract of service. In this chapter, these verses occur. 1. The sages have distinguished 5 sorts of attendants according to law. Among these are 4 sorts of laborers. The slaves are the 5th category, of which there are 15 species. 2. A student, an apprentice, a hired servant, and 4thly, an official. 3. The sages have declared that the state of dependence is common to all, but their respective position and income depends on their particular caste and occupations. 4. Know that there are 2 sorts of occupations, pure work and impure work. Impure work is that done by the slaves. Pure work is that done by laborers. Sweeping the gateway, the privy, the road and the place for rubbish, shampooing the secret parts of the body, gathering and putting away the leaving of food, ordure and urine. 6. And lastly, rubbing the master's limbs when desired. This should be regarded as impure work. All other work besides this is pure. 25. Thus have the 4 classes of servants doing pure work been enumerated. All the others who do dirty work are slaves, of whom there are 15 kinds. Reference. The 15 classes of slaves are defined by the Narad Smriti in these verses. 5.26. One born at his master's house, one purchased, one received by gift, one obtained by inheritance, one maintained during a general famine, one pledged by his rightful owner. 5.27. One released from heavy debt, one made captive in fight, one won through a wager, one who has come forward declaring, I am thine, an apostate from asceticism, one enslaved for a stipulated period. 5.28. One who has become slave in order to get a maintenance, one enslaved on account of his connection with a female slave, and one self-sold. These are 15 classes of slaves as declared by law. Reference over. It is clear that impure work was done by the slaves and that the impure work included scavenging. The question that arises is, who were these slaves? Were they Aryans or non-Aryans? That slavery existed among the Aryans admits of no doubt. An Aryan could be a slave of an Aryan. No matter to what Varna an Aryan belonged, he could be a slave. A Kshatriya could be a slave, so could a Vaishya. Even a Brahmin was not immune from the law of slavery. It is when Chaturvarna came to be recognized as a law of the land that a change was made in the system of slavery. What this change was can be seen from the extract from the Narad Smriti. Quotation begins, 39. In the inverse order of the 4 castes, slavery is not ordained except where a man violated the duties peculiar to his caste. Slavery in that respect is analogous to the condition of a wife. Quotation finished. Yagnavalkya also says that, quotation begins, 183 within brackets 2. Slavery is in the descending order of the Varnas and not in the ascending order. Quotation finished. This is explained by Vigneshwara in his Mitakshara, a commentary on Yagnavalkya Smriti, in these terms. Quotation begins, of the Varna such as the Brahmin and the rest, a state of slavery shall exist in the descending order. Thus of a Brahmin, a Kshatriya, and the rest may become a slave. Of a Kshatriya, the Vaishya and the Shudra, and of a Vaishya, a Shudra. This state of slavery shall operate in the descending order. Quotation finished. The change was a mere reorganization of slavery and the basis of the principles of graded inequality, which is the soul of Chaturvarna. To put it in a concrete form, the new law declared that a Brahmin could have a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and a Shudra as his slave. A Kshatriya could have Kshatriya, a Vaishya, and a Shudra as his slave. A Vaishya could have a Vaishya and a Shudra as his slave. A Shudra could have a Shudra only. With all this, the law of slavery remained, and all Aryans, whether they were Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishya, or Shudras, if they become slaves, were subject to it. Having regard to the duties prescribed for the slaves, this change in the law of slavery does not matter at all. It still means that a Brahmin, if he was a slave, a Kshatriya, if he was a slave, a Vaishya, if he was a slave, did the work of a scavenger. Only a Brahmin would not do scavenging in the house of a Kshatriya, Vaishya, or a Shudra, but he would do scavenging in the house of a Brahmin. Similarly, a Kshatriya would do scavenging in the house of a Brahmin and a Kshatriya, only he would not do it in the house of a Vaishya or Shudra, and a Vaishya would do scavenging in the house of a Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishya, only he would not do it in the house of a Shudra. It is therefore obvious that the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, and Vaishya, who are admittedly the Aryans, did the work of scavengers, which is the filthiest of filthy occupations. If scavenging was not loathsome to an Aryan, how can it be said that engaging in filthy occupations was the cause of untouchability? The theory of filthy occupation as an explanation of untouchability is, therefore, not tenable.